Caesar, who came to the prison for the first time, was shocked by the scene in front of him. All the chimpanzees were waiting in the yard for new monkeys to report in. The chimpanzee sitting in a high position enjoying a back massage suddenly stood up. As a new member, Caesar took the initiative to throw a toy ball to him as a friendly gesture, but he threw it away. As expected, he was the leader Rocket here, and his purpose of coming over was to establish authority over Caesar and make him realize whose territory this was. Upon their first meeting, he aggressively tore off Caesar's clothes and made a provoking gesture. Startled, Caesar quickly ran away, but before he could take 2 steps, he was tackled to the ground. The surrounding chimpanzees were extremely excited, while Caesar, feeling helpless with no one to help him, could only climb a tree to escape the pursuit. But to his surprise, Rocket chased after him relentlessly. Caesar could only give him a kick, which infuriated Rocket. He crazily pounced on Caesar and knocked him down under the tree, then jumped down to attack again. Fortunately, the administrator shot a tranquilizer in time. Seeing Caesar trying to stand up to fight back, the administrator shot another time, stopping the fight. Subsequently, Caesar was brought back to the cage. When he opened his eyes, he saw a red-haired chimpanzee gesturing to him, which shocked Caesar. It turned out that Maurice had learned sign language in the circus before. Caesar was very happy to see someone caring about him, and Maurice gave him a reminder humans don't like overly clever chimpanzees. Understanding the situation, Caesar began to contemplate. The next day, Will came to visit Caesar. Caesar thought he could go home happily, but was told he hadn't completed the legal procedures yet. Knowing this news, Caesar's mood plummeted as he knew he would suffer more abuse, and the departure of his master cut off his hope. Back in the cage, he decided to rely on himself. First, he wiped off the drawings on the wall with his clothes to appear ordinary, then quietly climbed up the tree branches to observe the construction of the building. Just as Caesar didn't know what to do, he suddenly noticed a gorilla locked in a cage below. This gave him an instant idea. Caesar then climbed to the top of the mountain to observe the situation outside. The next day, the administrator brought his friends to watch the chimpanzees. To amuse his friends, he extended the electric baton to the iron cell, causing the chimpanzees to yell. Only Caesar calmly reached out his finger and beckoned the man over. The man thought Caesar wanted a drink, but the next second he was grabbed by the throat. However, Caesar loosened his grip as the administrator arrived. After the administrator left, Caesar slowly extended his fist. It turned out that everything he did just now was to get a small knife. He then tied the knife to a wooden stick and cautiously extended it outside the door, slipping the knife into the keyhole. With a click, Caesar quietly climbed up and came to the side of the gorilla. Using the same method, he opened the door and carefully woke the gorilla up. The gorilla, who had not been out of the cage for a long time, hesitated to come out at first. Finally, with Caesar's encouragement, the gorilla rushed out, relishing its long-lost freedom. He expressed his gratitude to Caesar, who wanted to utilize the gorilla's power to subdue Rocket. After doing all this, Caesar threw a lump of feces on Rocket's face, luring him out. Watching Rocket coming out, Caesar used an iron bucket to knock him down. When Rocket tried to retaliate upon standing up, he suddenly saw Buck behind him, leaving him stunned, even if seen by all his followers. At this moment, he could only be wise enough to choose to submit to the victor. Caesar thus became the leader of all chimpanzees. The next day, Will bribed the warden with money. Seeing this, Caesar jumped down excitedly, but when he saw the collar Will held, Caesar seemed to make a certain decision because he knew that only when the apes were united could they not be bound by humans. After Will left, all the chimpanzees started to cheer, expressing their support for Caesar. Caesar then called out Rocket, letting him distribute cookies to the chimpanzees to solidify his position as the ruler. This act ultimately made Rocket completely submissive. And next, how will Caesar lead all chimpanzees to unite and escape from the cage to return to nature? Stay tuned for the next episode. A zookeeper is abusing a gorilla in the zoo, but today the situation is a bit different. Have you ever seen a talking gorilla? On this day, 2 highly intelligent gorillas in the zoo are discussing how to escape. Caesar tells Maurice that only gorillas can escape if they unite. Maurice, however, points out that many gorillas are too stupid. Caesar falls into thought upon hearing this. Just then, the manager next to them enters the door with a password. Caesar happens to see the password and memorizes it. In the quiet of the night, Caesar opens the iron door, climbs up the passage, turns the handle and opens the skylight, and climbs out onto the dome. But he doesn't want to escape on his own. Instead, he quietly returns to the owner's home, carefully opening the refrigerator. He finds the latest developed drug that can make gorillas smarter. Soon after returning to the prison, Caesar breaks open the drug and throws it out, sprinkling it in front of many gorillas. Soon the drug permeates the entire cage. The gorillas who inhale the gas wake up the next day and surprisingly become quiet. Caesar silently watches all of this, then goes to the exit and carefully examines their eyes. Seeing their eyes full of wisdom, Caesar knows he has succeeded. However, as Caesar was organizing a meeting for the gorillas, he was seen by the nearby director. Caesar quickly disperses the gorillas. The director sees this and does not suspect and leaves. When the administrator is feeding the gorillas later that night, he finds Caesar staring at him outside the cage. He walks out out with an electric baton. Meanwhile, a sniper is running towards the high platform to prepare to snipe Caesar. But Caesar is already standing in the blind spot. No matter how the administrator hits him, he refuses to leave this area. When the administrator wants to strike again, Caesar grabs him by hand.
Thinking part off me, you damn 38!
Caesar's words shock everyone present. Following this, Caesar punches the administrator and then returns to the cage to release all the gorillas. Former leader Rocket is completely submissive now that he enjoys freedom. Seeing the sniper, the freed gorillas quickly rush forward and pull him down. The next second is a beating. With a life-threatening situation looming, Caesar hurried over to stop it. He locks the man in the cage, but then realizes another person is waking up. Seeing the man pick up the electric baton, Caesar grabs a high-pressure water gun. As the baton and the water gun simultaneously start, the man is stunned by electricity. Seeing the label next to the man, Caesar remembers his companion in the laboratory. So, he releases the giant ape Buck in the courtyard, and then leads all the gorillas to break through the window and escape from the cage. They come to the highway and observe, preparing to save their companions and cross the city to reach the mangrove forest. Caesar divides the gorillas into two teams and plans to save their companions. One team led by Caesar and Rocket goes to the building, destroys all surveillance, and leaps into the laboratory, smashing the equipment and rescuing all the gorillas used as test subjects. At the same time, Buck leads a team to solve the gorillas in the zoo and takes the fence as a weapon. Then he leads the gorillas to the mangrove forest. How they will cross the city and what crises they will encounter next will be revealed in the next episode. Stay tuned. A group of highly intelligent gorillas broke into the office building. The first thing they did when they came in was to destroy all the monitors in the lab, then rescue their fellow primates who were about to be used as test subjects. The belated boss, upon seeing the chaotic scene, fell into despair. Looking up, he saw the upper floors already occupied by gorillas. Staring at him, groups of gorillas broke through the windows, preparing to meet up with the gorillas on the other side. The boss urgently called in Forbler to take them out. At that moment, Caesar was leading the gorillas to the mangrove forest, but unexpectedly, Forbler had already arrived. Upon seeing this, Caesar ordered the gorillas to climb up the building immediately. However, one injured gorilla was still shot down, just as Forbler was dragging the gorilla into the car to take him away. Suddenly a spear pierced through the roof of the car. Caesar was seen holding the spear standing on the rooftop, and the next moment, the spear swiftly flew towards them. After rescuing their comrade, Caesar led the gorillas to quickly retreat, leaving Buck and Maurice to cover their retreat. Seeing the vehicles coming into view, Maurice and Buck improvised on the spot. Picking up weapons, Maurice threw a manhole cover to disable a car. Then Buck exerted his strength to disable the engine. Next, they gathered at the rendezvous point. At this moment, the four leaders convened. Under Caesar's leadership, the gorillas were prepared to pass through the bridge to the mangrove forest. Unbeknownst to them, the police had already deployed a large number of forces at the exit, and used cavalry to drive them away from the rear. Caesar, upon noticing the situation, ordered the gorillas to halt. After discussing the plan with Maurice, they decided to split into three groups. One led by Kova would advance from above the bridge. Another led by the strategist Maurice would pass through below, while the remaining group, led by Caesar, would confront the cavalry. With a fierce roar, Caesar charged head-on against the cavalry. Seeing Buck about to tear apart a human, Caesar intervened just in time to stop this reckless act. On the other side, Koba had already led the gorillas to climb to the top of the bridge, but one gorilla was exposed and shot down. Maurice, below the bridge, saw his comrade being wounded and falling, immediately ordered the gorillas to speed up their passage. At that moment, Will was rushing to the scene, and the battle between humans and apes was about to begin on the bridge. Humans engage in a large-scale war with the apes. Caesar gestured, commanding the apes to overturn the bus as a shield to advance. Humans immediately opened fire upon seeing the bus in the mist, but the apes used the bus to block all the attacks. Just as the police were pondering what to do, Caesar rode out on a warhorse through the fog. With a command from Caesar, Koba, who had been waiting, descended from the sky. And at the same time, apes under the bridge charged into the battle. A dramatic battle between humans and apes began at that moment. Rocket agilely jumped into the bus and tackled the officer out, but he seemed to remember Caesar's advice and did not finish off the officer. Meanwhile, Caesar was commanding the battlefield. As Buck pulled a man out and threw him into the sea, humans fled in terror. Apes under Caesar's command also emerged victoriously in the battle, and at that moment, Will finally arrived. He stopped the celebration of Caesar, but a helicopter appeared on the bridge not far away. Caesar immediately prepared for battle, but the overwhelming firepower that followed caused many casualties among the apes. Caesar could only temporarily hide behind the bus, but Caesar would not be defeated so easily. He opened the bus door and searched for a suitable weapon inside. He bravely stepped out with an iron chain in hand to protect the ape clan. As the iron chain flew out, two men fell to the ground instantly, but the driver pulled out a gun and shot. Buck saw this and roared angrily, swiftly pushing Caesar aside, took all the gunfire, and then, regardless of his own safety, he leaped over the bridge in flight. The helicopter lost control and crashed into the bridge at that moment. Caesar rushed forward immediately, pulled Buck down from the plane, but his dear old brother, who once risked his life, lay motionless at that moment. Caesar was filled with intense sadness, but someone calling out shattered the silence at that moment. Caesar looked on coldly, then turned and walked away, leaving the matter to Koba, and Koba, who had suffered so much in the laboratory, would not let this heartless boss go. Suddenly, Koba slowly extended his foot. Settling everything, Caesar led the apes to the mangrove forest. As they entered the mist, Will ran towards the police car and drove quickly to the mangrove forest. Will entered the mangrove forest to find Caesar, but was swiftly knocked down by Koba descending from the sky. Just as Koba was about to harm Will, Caesar ran over and knocked Koba down. As Koba seemed to want to fight back, a stern look from Caesar scared Koba away. Later, Caesar reached out and lifted Will up. Will's reason for being here was not only to apologize to Caesar, but also to invite Caesar back home. Caesar knew the man in front of him had shown him great kindness. His heart wavered, but when he looked at his companions in the jungle, Caesar pulled Will over with a pained expression. Will was shocked to hear Caesar's words. He knew he couldn't keep Caesar here, so he let Caesar leave bravely. Caesar, with a heart full of sadness, returned to the ape clan. All the apes bowed and worshipped him. From then on, Caesar became the leader, and how he would lead the ape clan with his outstanding vision. Let us look forward to the next installment. Caesar roared loudly. Deer were frightened and ran wildly in all directions. Second in command Koba led the troops to intercept in the front. Even though some apes were knocked over during the process, it did not affect the direction of the deer herd at all. Caesar took the weapon from Koba and swung it forward. The deer fell instantly. Then Caesar took the weapon and came down to harvest the prey with his son, but unexpectedly found the bear's paw print again. He asked his son to stay in place and wait, but his rebellious son would not listen. He walked towards the prey with a spear in hand, thinking it would be an easy catch, but he was suddenly slapped away by the bear. Caesar saw this and immediately pounced over to protect his son and engage in a battle with the bear, but his weapon was knocked away. He immediately called for Koba, who was commanding the battlefield, and Koba quickly came to the rescue with a spear in hand. Seeing the general Koba coming to help, Caesar stood up and roared at the bear to attract the bear's attention. Just then, Koba swooped down with the spear from above and struck the bear directly, successfully saving the two. Afterward, Caesar thanked Koba and then patiently taught his son a lesson, but his rebellious son would not listen to any instruction. Feeling indignant, he took the spear and turned to leave. These apes not only had high intelligence but also their own civilization and order. They built a living place near the water source using wood, and lived there for more than 10 years under Caesar's leadership. They even had Maurice open a school to teach knowledge. The reason they were so smart was that humans had invented a drug to treat dementia 10 years ago, and their experimental subjects were apes. The apes who inhaled the drug became as intelligent as humans, but the drug was deadly contagious to humans. During the experiment on the apes, one staff member accidentally leaked the drug and infected the neighbor who was a pilot. This led to the virus spreading worldwide, which almost led to the extinction of humans. Only a few humans with antibodies survived, and they managed to live in this abandoned base for 10 years. During these 10 years, Caesar had already had a second child. Maurice happily congratulated Caesar on the new arrival, and Caesar couldn't help but sigh that they had been together for 10 years. Maurice asked Caesar if he still missed humans, but they hadn't seen any since the battle on the bridge, and he didn't know if they were still around. The next day, Caesar's son Blue Eyes and Rocket's son Ash Gray went fishing by the river, but on their way back, they encountered humans. Both sides were stunned for a moment, and the man immediately pulled out a gun. With a loud bang, Ash Gray fell to the ground. When Caesar heard the gunshot at this moment, he immediately came out and gathered the apes, arriving at the battlefield the next second, surrounding the humans. The man, seeing the strength and number of apes, quickly apologized and promptly ordered his companion to put down the gun and surrender. Once the humans left, Maurice found a backpack, and Caesar immediately ordered Koba to track the humans. Finding that they were living in the abandoned building, Koba, who harbored deep hatred towards humans, suggested striking first and incited Rocket to avenge Ash Gray. Caesar stated that launching a war would waste decades of effort and result in countless deaths and injuries among the apes. But Koba insisted that showing strength was necessary to avoid being bullied. After contemplating, Caesar agreed to the request. The next morning, Caesar gathered all the ape species and marched towards the city. The humans panicked upon seeing the apes and quickly armed themselves on a high platform. What would happen next will be updated in the next episode. Caesar rode his war horse, leading his tribe into human territory.
Apes! Do not want war, but will fight if we must.
And then he had his son return the found backpack to them.
Ape! Home! Human! Soul! Do not come back.
After drawing a clear line with humans, Caesar led his army to leave. At this point, everyone in the city became extremely panicked. They were afraid of a strong attack from the apes. The mayor immediately picked up a megaphone to pacify the people. But this had no effect on the humans who were facing depleted food and electricity. With the lack of electricity, they couldn't communicate with the outside world, and the only operational power station was near the ape territory. So the mayor prepared to launch a strong attack to eliminate the ape species. But Maurice, who had met Caesar, believes negotiations were the best choice. So the next day, he drove into the deep forest, bid farewell to everyone and went up the mountain alone to find Caesar for negotiations. As he went deeper, he came to the ape territory, and soon he was brought before Caesar by the gorillas. Maurice immediately expressed that he meant no offense, and explained that humans would soon be unable to survive. Only by fixing the power station could they survive and reproduce. Koba, the second in command, strongly believed that humans could not be trusted and should be wiped out. To verify whether humans were lying to the apes, Caesar followed him to an abandoned power station. He tried to explain that humans really needed energy, and said that fixing these facilities could start it up.
Is any of this making any sense to you?
Having grown up in a human household, Caesar naturally understood the importance of electricity. The kind-hearted Caesar eventually chose to trust humans, agreeing to let them go up the mountain to build the power station. The only requirement was that humans must surrender all their weapons. But Koba, who hated humans, was still skeptical. He told Caesar that giving humans electricity would make them more dangerous, and questioned why Caesar wanted to help them. Caesar explained that humans had no other options. If they were driven away, they would definitely come back to attack for resources. And even if Koba believed humans to be bad, they would harm apes whether successful or not. Seeing Caesar sticking to his position, Koba had no choice but to lower his head. The next morning, Caesar went to the riverside for monitoring, but he did not see Koba, the second in command. Maurice told Caesar that Koba went out sulking to hunt. Unbeknownst to Caesar, Koba took this opportunity to go to human land and discovered that humans were checking their guns to understand the number of firearms. Koba went into a warehouse but was discovered by humans. He stared fiercely at the men, but another person came in. Thinking quickly in the crisis, he stuck out his tongue to relax the humans, and the two men thought he was a dumb monkey and let him leave. Meanwhile, on the other side, the reservoir was filled with debris from years of disuse, and they could only enter to place explosives. But a sudden explosion buried several people inside. Caesar immediately brought his people to the rescue, and then brought them to the riverside to rest. But Caesar's youngest son found a gun, and when he was in danger, with a blue furious look in his eyes, a man aimed a gun at him. Seeing this, Caesar immediately knocked down the man and took the gun.
No, Caesar, no! No!
But even though humans violated the rules, the kind-hearted Caesar still did not harm them, just threw the guns into the river, and drove them back to the human territory. But just as Caesar returned home, he heard news of his wife falling ill. He rushed to the room. The medical staff told him that his wife had caught a cold after childbirth. At the same time, Maurice thought that going back would only be a wasted effort, so he took the risk and went up the mountain to find Caesar again. But when he saw his wife on the brink of death,
I have medicine.
there was nothing Caesar could do but accept help. To show his gratitude, Caesar agreed to give them one more day to build, and sent out apes to help with the repairs. At this time, Koba had returned after gathering intelligence. He told Caesar's son that humans were very dangerous, and they needed to find Caesar promptly. When he came to the power plant and saw that the apes were helping with the construction, he couldn't take it anymore. He pushed down the child.
Why Caesar? What Caesar? Caesar!
To find out what happens next, stay tuned for the next episode, coming soon.
Why Caesar? What Caesar? Caesar!
Koba rushed to see Caesar in a hurry, furious because he had found out that humans in the city were stockpiling weapons, enough to destroy the entire human habitat.
Humans
attack your sons. You let them stay. Caesar loved humans more than apes. More than your sons.
Caesar, unaware of the weapons, became instantly angry when he saw Koba challenging him. He tackled him to the ground and then started pounding on Koba's face, not allowing his authority as a leader to be undermined. He then grabbed Koba and threw him harshly to the ground, leaving Koba's face covered in bruises and blood. It was only then that Koba regained his senses, as there was a rule among humans not to harm each other. Seeing that no one else understood him, Koba reached out to Caesar for forgiveness, and when Caesar agreed, he immediately left. Back at his place, Koba's confidant asked why he didn't tell Caesar about the weapons. Feeling disillusioned, Koba thought that Caesar wouldn't believe him anymore. The next day, Koba found two human weapons inspectors and pretended to be foolish to gain their trust. When the men relaxed, Koba took one of their guns and shot one of them in the back, then quickly returned to the ape tribe. On the other side, Caesar had helped humans fix the electricity, and his wife had recovered with the help of humans. But as they celebrated, Caesar suddenly saw Koba below, aiming a gun at him. A gunshot hit Caesar's shoulder, leaving him in disbelief as he fell heavily off a cliff. The tribe of apes fell into chaos, and Koba's followers started a fire while Koba, seizing the opportunity, took the gun and shouted for the
Humans! Kill Caesar! Burn evil! Apes must attack human city! Come! Fight for Caesar!
tribe to attack humans, with Koba leading them. The apes quickly reached the armory and armed themselves. Meanwhile, humans were still celebrating the arrival of electricity, unaware of the impending danger, until the apes rode in on horses and approached the city. The humans hurriedly climbed up the high platform to defend themselves, with the mayor picking up a horn to boost their morale. As they regained their confidence, they awaited the arrival of the ape tribe. At that moment, Koba was leading all the apes swiftly towards the city, and a fierce battle was about to unfold between them. Koba hid in the shadows and gunned down Caesar with one shot. Then he took the gun and blatantly proclaimed to his fellow apes that Caesar was assassinated by humans.
Humans! Kill Caesar! Come! Fight for Caesar!
He wielded the flag of vengeance for Caesar and launched an attack on humans overnight. But the first wave of attack was met with heavy casualties, with many apes falling on the battlefield. Despite seeing his comrades fall, Koba urged them to continue the assault. He then leaped onto a horse and charged forward with guns blazing, appearing like a madman. The apes were astonished by Koba's actions as he single-handedly suppressed all human firepower. Allowing the ape army to advance. The mayor, witnessing the situation, hastily raised a rocket launcher and aimed it at the oil barrel below, firing to block the advance and taking down numerous apes. Koba, seeing the flames blocking the path, instructed the apes to climb the electrical poles and move forward. The apes quickly climbed the poles and charged forward, but were met with a barrage of intense firepower that killed them all. Seeing his fallen comrades, Koba continued to urge them to push forward. Meanwhile, little Caesar swiftly grabbed a gasoline drum and threw it towards the humans, allowing the apes to break through the defense line with coordinated efforts. Meanwhile, on the other side, Malcolm and Dreyfus found the wounded Caesar with a faint breath. They carried Caesar into their vehicle, with Caesar expressing concern about his family's safety. Upon learning this, Caesar turned his head in sorrow. Val, seeing the injuries, knew that surgery was needed, but the medical kit was in the city. Val immediately volunteered to retrieve it. Meanwhile, the human defense line had completely collapsed, driving them into the church where the apes had driven them to the rooftop. Koba ordered the apes to drive the humans towards the rooftop, but one man picked up an iron rod and swung it at Koba. In response, Koba snatched the iron rod and threw it to Rocket's son, Ash, instructing him to kill the man. Ignoring the man's plea for mercy, Koba pressed Ash to commit the act. However, Ash's reluctance only infuriated Koba, who dragged Ash upstairs and threw him to the ground, intending to instill fear in the others.
Apes, follow Koba.
Witnessing Koba's brutality, the others remained silent. Subsequently, the apes captured most of the remaining humans, locked them in cages, and stationed guards. After completing these actions, the apes returned to the city to search for the rest of the humans. Meanwhile, Caesar's eldest son, Blue Eyes, discovered the faithful apes held captive. Unable to save them under the overwhelming force, he reluctantly obeyed Koba's orders. Meanwhile, Malcolm had made his way into the city, but as he was preparing to leave with the medicine, the apes found him, forcing him to hide in a house where he encountered Blue Eyes by chance. Desperately shaking his head, Malcolm pleaded for no violence, a memory of Caesar's advice. But at that moment, the anguished look in Blue Eyes' eyes made him stop.
Father.
Moments later, Malcolm met Caesar at his home and, witnessing Caesar's injuries, He directed his fierce look at the humans. However, Caesar intervened, stopping him and revealing Koba's treachery. Blue Eyes finally understood the truth that Koba was behind everything. Shortly after, with Caesar's guidance, Blue Eyes returned to the city, while the surgery on Caesar's wounds allowed him to recover rapidly. Watching old video footage of himself, Caesar shed tears of emotion. At the same time, Blue Eyes had rescued all the faithful apes and reunited with them in the city. They soon arrived at the building where Caesar and Koba were about to engage in a power struggle at the tower's summit. Let's wait and see what unfolds in the next chapter of this gripping tale in this brutal world. Koba and Caesar are on the brink of a power struggle.
Caesar. Weak. Koba. Weaker.
Koba sets down his machine gun and launches an attack on Caesar. Caesar, still injured from a previous battle, quickly finds himself on the losing end in the first round. As they grapple, both tumble from the iron frame, causing Caesar to take a hard fall. But Koba isn't faring much better. His abdomen is slashed. He grabs an iron rod from his side, transforming into old Koba, and relentlessly swings the rod at Caesar. As Caesar tries to escape, he manages to counterattack, swiftly grabbing an iron frame to face off against Koba.
Caesar, brother, to human. Koba, fight for Ape. Free Ape. Kill Ape. Koba.
Koba, now exposed, erupts in anger, kicking Caesar and then swinging the iron rod with all his might. But Koba soon exhausts himself with the constant swings, clutching his wounded abdomen. Caesar seizes the moment he had been waiting for, swiftly striking Koba's wounded spot with his fists and using his foot to block the attacks, delivering a final blow that sends Koba reeling. Enraged, Koba pushes the iron frame, causing the high platform to collapse. Fortunately, both grab onto a rope in time, engaging in a mid-air struggle. On the other side, Maurice meets the mayor, learning of their plan to use a bomb to destroy the building. With the apes trapped on top, after some contemplation, Maurice decides to assist them, pointing a gun at the mayor and another individual. But the mayor, lost in madness, presses the button. Triggering a massive explosion that pins the apes beneath the iron frame. Caesar rushes to rescue everyone, while Koba also regains consciousness, slowly making his way to his comrades and lifting the iron mesh, only to take the gun instead and recklessly fire at his own kind. Clearly, Koba has succumbed to madness, continuing to shoot the apes despite their injuries. Seeing this, Caesar has no choice but to temporarily retreat. One of the apes attempts to strike Koba with an iron rod, only to face even fiercer attacks in return. Witnessing the ape's injuries, Caesar becomes enraged and charges at Koba, pushing him onto the iron frame. As Koba tries to climb up, the pain from his injuries hinders him, and just as he gathers strength to ascend, Caesar intervenes. Following the apes tribe's rules, slowly pulling Koba up. However, upon seeing the extent of the injuries inflicted on his fellow apes,
You are not Ape.
Caesar makes a difficult decision. Thus, Caesar loses his second in command, but with no time for mourning. He must lead the apes back to the jungle as quickly as possible. As he is organizing, Caesar spots Maurice, who informs him that the mayor has contacted the military, and they will soon arrive at their location. Realizing that a battle is inevitable, Caesar bids farewell to Maurice, and prepares to lead his family and tribe to rebuild their home. What war lies ahead for the apes? The next episode will be updated soon. Stay tuned. This group of Special Forces soldiers are killing gorillas in the forest, and they used artillery to destroy the only trench of the ape tribe. In an instant, the monkeys on duty were killed and wounded. Among them, a surviving sentry on horseback hurried back to the camp to report. Upon receiving the frontline report, the Ape Warrior Legion quickly arrived at the battlefield. They arrived at the trench, one side protecting the wounded members and the other launching a counterattack. This Special Forces team is not all human, but also includes guerrilla traitors. They were once loyal subordinates of Koba, but when Koba was killed by Caesar, they defected to the humans, and now the ape tribe threw smoke bombs at the humans. It turns out that the guerrilla army has arrived. They raised their bows and shot thousands of arrows at the humans, killing them and causing them to flee in disarray. Soon, the Special Forces were reduced to just 4 survivors. One surviving soldier saw a walkie-talkie on his fallen teammate, and quickly picked it up, anxiously reporting the situation to the colonel. But unexpectedly, a gorilla descended from above and captured him. Other gorillas quickly followed and dealt with the remaining humans. In this battle, the gorilla tribe suffered heavy casualties. Caesar witnessed all of this, looking at the injured people. With anger and tears in his red eyes, he scrutinized the group. Maurice told him that 63 had died in action. The insensitive traitor, Donkey, mocked at this moment.
How long you think wood can protect you?
An annoyed guard immediately knocked him down. Caesar ordered Rocket to arrest him. Then, Caesar looked at the few soldiers and finally decided to let them go and instructed them to deliver a message to the colonel that as long as they leave the forest to the apes, the war will end. Otherwise, they will fight to the last. At that moment, Rocket came running with a bloody head informing Caesar. Meanwhile, Caesar's son and Rocket returned. Within these 2 years, they had found important information. Caesar immediately called them back to the base and convened all the apes for a meeting. Blue Eyes and Rocket discovered a new habitat, and in the middle, there was a desert blocking the humans, so it was very safe. Blue Eyes was excited to hear about a safe habitat and immediately said they would leave tonight. Caesar said they must find a safe route before they could go. This mission was a matter of life and death for the ape tribe. They must unite to survive the ordeal. At night, Caesar silently guarded his wife and son as they slept. But suddenly, green lights appeared above the waterfall. Caesar quickly woke his son and asked him to guard his wife. Then, Caesar quickly found Luca and asked him to assemble a team. At the same time, soldiers approached Caesar's wife and son. Fortunately, Blue Eyes was prepared and descended from the sky to deal with them, but there was still a soldier behind them. Meanwhile, Caesar dealt with a soldier and heard on the walkie-talkie that Blue Eyes was in danger and quickly ran towards the cave entrance, but it was too late. At this moment, the colonel was hanging on the rope ready to evacuate. Both leaders locked eyes, and in the colonel's gaze, Caesar saw his wife and son lying in a pool of blood. He was overwhelmed with grief, but the colonel did not give him time to mourn. He raised his gun and shot at Caesar, then quickly climbed up the rope to leave. However, Caesar couldn't accept what he saw. He leaped and climbed the rope frantically upward. Seeing this, the lieutenant colonel decisively cut the rope with a knife. Thus, Caesar fell into the river, and after a few minutes, he grabbed a rock and saved himself. Afterwards, Caesar was consumed by grief and couldn't snap out of it. Luca conducted reconnaissance and informed Caesar that Koba had betrayed them. He felt that Koba had exposed the ape tribe's location, but Caesar was still in mourning. Suddenly, he heard a voice, and upon closer inspection, he saw that his younger son had returned. The father and son embraced and wept together. The next morning, the tribe immediately decided to move to the new habitat. After all, this place had been fully exposed, but Caesar decided to stay behind because he wanted to avenge his wife and son. He entrusted his younger son to the gorillas in the tribe to care for, and then asked Chris and Rocket to lead the ape tribe in migration. After arranging everything, Caesar alone mounted a warhorse and quickly left, but not long after, a few loyal subordinates rode horses to catch up. They expressed their desire to join him in seeking revenge for the fallen gorillas.
I may not make it back.
Reluctantly, Caesar had to agree, and thus, they embarked on the path of revenge. Along the way, they passed by a small cabin with smoke rising. Caesar decided to search to see if there were soldiers there. At that moment, a man carrying wood came out, and upon seeing what was before him, he froze. Just as he was about to pull out his gun, Caesar shot him dead. At that moment, Caesar, unlike in the past, was not as merciful, driven solely by the desire for revenge. He resembled Koba from years before. Suddenly, Caesar heard a sound, and what happens next? Let's wait for the next episode to find out. A few gorillas kicked open the door, but the sight in front of them disappointed them greatly. Suddenly, a faint noise from another room caught Caesar's attention. He immediately took his shotgun and walked lightly towards the door, kicking open the door once again, but did not find the person they were looking for. Instead, they saw a weak little girl. Maurice intervened and stopped the gun pointing at the girl. Then he showed a kind smile to the girl, but the girl remained motionless. Seeing this, Maurice picked up a doll with a bloodstained nose and handed it to her. Noticing how pitiful the girl was, Maurice asked Caesar to take her with them. Maurice explained to Caesar that he couldn't survive alone, for the girl was not only weak but also unable to speak. After thinking about it, Caesar had no choice but to agree. They immediately mounted their horses and set out on the path of revenge. They crossed the long beach and entered the mountain passage. Suddenly Caesar raised his hand to signal a stop, as he saw lights ahead not far away. Caesar then took out his binoculars to observe, only to find the traitor White Fur Kong he had encountered before. Caesar led the gorillas to find him, and, pointing their weapons at White Fur, demanded to know the whereabouts of the colonel. White Fur immediately stated that the colonel had already left. He said they would also go after the colonel the next day. White Fur claimed he didn't intentionally betray their location, but was persuaded by the released Kong to join the colonel in exchange for sparing his life. White Fur, upon seeing Caesar's wife and son had already sacrificed themselves, was at a loss. He reached out for Caesar's forgiveness, but seeing soldiers outside, he tried to seek help again. In that moment, Caesar couldn't hold back anymore and punched him in the face. With the help of the gorillas, they subdued him. As he tried to shout, Caesar immediately covered his mouth. This continued for a few minutes until the soldiers left. Caesar finally released him, only to find that he had stopped breathing. That night, Caesar drank water by the fire and seemed to see Kova in his thoughts. Suddenly, Maurice woke him up, telling him that the soldiers were on the move. Caesar led the guerrillas on horseback to chase after them. Days later, they caught up to the snowy place, where they found 3 soldiers' bodies, all with fatal wounds, and all bleeding from the nose. Unable to speak, Maurice noticed that their symptoms were the same as the girls. Seeing the men in such agony, Caesar understood his intentions, but after the situation was resolved, they lost track of their target, and had to climb up the elevated bridge to find their trail. At that moment, a mysterious figure appeared, stealing weapons from a bag. Fortunately, Luca noticed him in time, but he managed to escape on horseback. They had no choice but to go after the thief. Thus, a chase ensued in the forest. The mysterious man fired shots to hinder Caesar, and when they caught up, they found only a lone horse. Seeing a house ahead, they cautiously entered. What happens next? We'll have to wait for the next installment. Caesar woke up from a nightmare to find that his white horse had been stolen by a mysterious person. Caesar and his companions quickly rode to catch up, eventually arriving at an abandoned wooden house. They tracked the thief to the hall of the house, and finally found the thief hiding in the fireplace. Upon hearing the cocking of Caesar's gun, the mysterious thief immediately threw out the stolen items, then raised his hands and slowly walked towards Caesar. Bad Monkey saw the little girl shivering from the cold next to him. He immediately took off his down jacket and handed it to the little girl next to him. As night fell, the Bad Monkey lit a campfire. Seeing so many new friends, he took out some expired cookies and shared them with everyone. Amidst the joy, Caesar saw the address on the packaging. The Bad Monkey quickly explained to him that it was found in an abandoned military base. On the side, Rocket said that it might be from the Colonel's group. After thinking, Caesar immediately said they would leave tomorrow. Caesar spent a sleepless night, and soon it was dawn the next day. Luca saw the little girl and walked over, then reached for a branch, picked a flower and placed it next to the little girl's ear. The little girl smiled, and from this, it could be seen that the apes now had emotions. At this time, the Bad Monkey was also ready, and came out wearing a down vest. Following the Bad Monkey's guidance, they quickly found the military base. Caesar and Luca took the lead to scout. Caesar raised his binoculars to observe and saw 2 horses, but the next moment, a soldier appeared in front of them. Luckily, Luca tackled the soldier and saved Caesar. However, another soldier ran towards them. Fortunately, Rocket arrived in time, but when they looked at Luca, they saw that he had been shot. Caesar looked at Luca in deep sorrow. The little girl also sadly took the flower off and put it next to Luca's ear.
It was a mistake bringing you up. This is my fight. I will finish this alone. Now, join the others.
After that, Caesar set off alone on his journey. After walking for a while, they finally reached near the base, but found the 8 warriors tied to a wooden frame. The more Caesar looked, the more anxious he became, until he reached the edge of a cliff, and saw the tribe members all locked in cages. His heart broke. Suddenly, he heard the 8 warrior behind him breathing. Caesar ran over immediately, unbound him and saved him. The 8 warrior told Caesar that the colonel wanted to force the apes to do hard labor, but before he could finish, he collapsed. As Caesar was contemplating, the treacherous gorilla attacked. When Caesar woke up again, he found himself in front of the colonel. He went mad and lunged at the colonel, but was tightly controlled by Koba with an iron chain. The colonel decided to imprison Caesar as well. On the way, Caesar saw his son and many other young apes locked together, while Caesar himself was confined with the tribe members. The tribe members, upon seeing Caesar also being locked up, turned their heads away in disappointment. An ape told Caesar they had suffered too much and during this time had not received any food or water, and those apes, weak from hunger, were abused by humans at the slightest mistake. Seeing the suffering of the tribe members, Caesar could no longer bear it. And how will Caesar use his intelligence to rescue the tribe members? Let's look forward to the next episode. In the harsh environment of more than 40 degrees below zero, a group of apes were all enslaved by humans to do hard labor. Since being captured and brought here, they have not eaten anything. An elderly ape accidentally fell while working, and was about to be cruelly beaten by the humans with whips. Leader Caesar could not bear to see his people being beaten, so he stood up. Upon hearing Caesar's shout, the apes all went on strike, raising their arms in support of Caesar. But when the colonel saw this, he immediately sent his men to grab Caesar and brought him forward, subjecting him to the pain of the whip. Caesar had to endure the suffering on his knees for the safety of his people, but the ruthless colonel would not agree to Caesar's request.
Tell them to get back to work.
Need food, water.
He stood up and aimed a gun at Caesar's head. Facing the colonel's threat, an ape immediately raised a stone in protest, knowing that only Caesar's survival would bring hope. Seeing this, the other apes also started working. Although Caesar was angry at the colonel, he could not make any move, and could only watch helplessly as the colonel let his wife's killer slip away. Caesar was then nailed to a wooden frame, while Maurice and Rocket observed everything from the side, trying to come up with a plan for a rescue. By nightfall, a donkey appeared in front of Caesar and wielded a weapon, only to cut the rope that bound him. It was a warning from the colonel to Caesar.
Work again and I'll begin slaughtering the apes one by one.
Apes need food and water.
They'll get food and water when they finish their work.
Caesar had already noticed the colonel's defenses and knew that the apes would be slaughtered if they lost their utility. Seeing the colonel's heartlessness, Caesar became furious and rushed towards him in a frenzy, but he was restrained by the donkey. The next day, the colonel brought a cart of food and threw it to the apes in cages, in exchange for Caesar enduring the torture of a cold water bath in the freezing temperatures. This gesture was met with gratitude by the apes, while at the same time, Rocket and Maurice were exploring the terrain and discovered an underground tunnel that could lead to the military base above. Meanwhile, Caesar was freezing cold, and in a delirium, he thought he saw Koba.
Slave. You cannot save me. Apes all die here. Try me.
Only to realize it was the donkey. The donkey cut the rope and released Caesar. The colonel told the donkey that if Caesar was still alive, he should put him to work as well. At the same time, a young girl disregarded the danger and walked towards the base, and managed to safely pass through the blockade to the cage where Caesar was being held. She took out the stuffed doll that had been her companion for a long time, and threw it to Caesar. Seeing his reaction, she asked if he was thirsty, and fed him water from a container she had. It was the girl's help that helped Caesar get through the night. The apes behind also made a gesture of unity, and the girl extended her hand to encourage Caesar. But little did they know that patrolling soldiers were approaching. Caesar told the girl to run quickly, and Rocket, who was observing outside, saw the soldiers and boldly walked out to attract their attention, saving the girl. As a result, Rocket was also imprisoned in a cage. His first action upon entering was to show concern for Caesar. And what happens next? Let's look forward to the next episode. Gorillas are all enslaved by humans and forced to do hard labor. Some disobedient ones even get whipped. If they dare to resist, they will be shot dead. At night, a gorilla named Rocket breaks into the military camp alone to rescue his fellows. As expected, Rocket is severely beaten by the soldiers and then locked in a cage with other gorillas. Despite being covered in injuries, Rocket ignores the pain and discusses an escape plan with Caesar on the other side. The next day, the gorillas are released to work, and they calculate the distance to the tunnel to report to Caesar. Caesar then conveys the message to Maurice through gestures outside. Upon receiving the news, Maurice immediately takes the bad ape to dig the tunnel, but due to height limitations, he has to step on Maurice's back for support. With Maurice's help, the tunnel is soon dug through, leading to the gorillas inside. The gorillas express their gratitude to him for his assistance. However, meanwhile, the tunnel leading to the young gorillas starts flooding with water. Helpless, Maurice has to close the passage and think of another solution. Upon learning of the situation, the gorillas report to Caesar, who looks at the children with tears in his eyes. He then states that they can only be rescued from the surface, but the base is guarded by soldiers. Caesar is in a dilemma, pondering on the situation. Before long, the patrolling soldiers appear once again. While observing the situation below, one of the soldiers suddenly receives a handful of feces in the face. Enraged, he turns around.
You animals!
Only to be dragged into the underground tunnel. It turns out that Maurice has been waiting there for quite some time. Thus, Rocket obtains the keys and a gun and quickly rescues Caesar. They both then go to where the children are being held captive. Caesar's eyes fill with tears upon seeing the children. Father and son hug tightly, but their main focus is leading the children to safety. Working together, they divide the tasks of surveillance and evacuating the children. The young gorillas climb the iron ropes to join the adult gorillas in the cage. Then, they are guided through the underground tunnel to reunite with Maurice. Soon, all the gorillas successfully escape, leaving behind only a few adult gorillas inside. Seeing their tribe fleeing, Caesar approaches the cage. Rocket rushes over, asking about Caesar's intentions. Caesar stares intensely at the colonel's window, full of hatred in his eyes. He turns to Rocket and says,
Sorry, you must go. This was right. I am like Koba. He could not escape his hate. I still cannot escape mine.
But at that moment, the Northern Forces warplanes arrive to capture the brutal colonel. The loud sound prompts the soldiers to act quickly, setting up anti-aircraft guns. However, unintentionally, the escaping guerrillas get caught in the crossfire in the middle of the battlefield. At the same time, Caesar arrives at the colonel's quarters, only to find the soldiers calling for the colonel. But the colonel shows no signs of movement. Caesar takes advantage of the chaos to climb up to the colonel's balcony. The scene before him is a total mess. On the table, he spots a blood-stained decanter and a photo. He quietly enters the colonel's room and discovers the colonel lying weakly on the bed. Caesar takes the gun and aims it at the colonel's head, but when he sees the ragdoll on the ground, he realizes the colonel has also contracted the simian flu. Seeing the colonel in such pain, Caesar cannot pull the trigger. Perhaps it was the photo he saw earlier, or maybe his hatred was restrained by reason. Slowly, he lowers the gun, places it on the box, and turns to leave. But the colonel cannot bear to have his dignity trampled. He picks up the gun and ends his own life. Next, how will the gorillas escape the battlefield? Let's look forward to the next episode. The chimpanzee is assisting humans in flying the plane. The soldier on the side raises a rocket launcher and aims at the sky. With one precise shot, The rocket hits the tail of the plane, successfully bringing it down and destroying it. After some celebration, Caesar helps the soldiers reload ammunition in preparation for the attack, but they realize the majority of the ape tribe is retreating at this moment, so they quickly pull the trigger and aim at the retreating ape tribe. At this moment, Caesar, coming out of the colonel's room, witnessed the ape tribe being massacred. In anger, he sees a petrol canister knocked down nearby. Thinking about the grenades inside the room, Caesar immediately goes back, grabs one, and then strides towards the balcony, jumping down, using the flag as a cushion to land on the ground, quickly rushing towards the petrol canister amidst the gunfire. Meanwhile, the intense firepower is causing great suffering for the ape tribe, and seeing so many of his kind falling before him, Caesar's heart undergoes a tremendous turmoil.
Jockey! Grenade launcher!
Just as Caesar pulls out the grenade launcher, he freezes. He sees Caesar, in an attempt to save the ape tribe, braving the gunfire without regard for his own safety. And then, in the astonished gaze of Caesar, Caesar emerges with a grenade in hand. But at the critical moment, he is shot down by an arrow, and the grenade is knocked away. The soldier with the crossbow immediately steps forward to aim at Caesar. Seeing all of this, Caesar's expression changes, and in the next moment, the soldier is blown up by a mortar shell. As the smoke clears, Caesar looks behind in confusion. It turns out, it was the chimpanzee who, at the moment of life and death, saved Caesar, but he is also shot dead by the soldier behind him. At this moment, Caesar, who has reacted, picks up the grenade and throws it towards the petrol canister. In an instant, a massive explosion occurs, destroying the entire defense line of the soldiers. Caesar rises, looks at the now destroyed defense line. Suddenly, he hears a sound and turns to look to the side. A larger explosion instantly comes. Fortunately, Caesar dives into a tunnel in time, and so the entire base turns into ashes. The soldiers outside, seeing the defense line collapse, immediately leave. Meanwhile, Caesar crawls out of the tunnel. He sees the soldiers rushing from the north, but Caesar, regardless of the danger, stands up at this moment and looks into the distance. The soldiers see Caesar and raise their guns, but in the next second, they witness an avalanche from afar. At this moment, Maurice on the mountain notices the danger. He immediately organizes the young chimpanzees to climb up the trees. Caesar also quickly runs away after the avalanche, leaping up and climbing the tree, while the unfortunate soldiers are engulfed by the avalanche. When the avalanche dissipates, Caesar successfully survives, and his tribe also escapes danger by hiding in the trees. Afterward, they embark on a long-distance migration, arriving at a secluded paradise. Seeing the ape tribe out of danger, Caesar sits down with relief. Beside him is still Maurice from the beginning. He shows Maurice his wounds. Then he pulls Maurice's hand over and tells him some things.
Don't worry. Maurice. You're all home now. Apes are strong. With or without me.
After speaking, Caesar looks at the joyous ape tribe by his side and falls into a deep sleep. What will happen next in this secluded paradise? Let us look forward to the release of the 4th installment.